So welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining me today to have a go at showing you how I might have come to compose this painting, which I call Sun Rising Over Water. It's a depiction of a favourite location. It's actually the Wellow Brook, but I've set up this demo as part of the Cam Valley Art Trail, and that is its sort of twin brook. The Cam Brook is just very close to Wellow Brook. They look really similar and they're very beautiful. They get enlarged and engorged during the winter months, and they cross through beautiful fords. The Wellow Ford is incredibly picturesque with a little humpback bridge. And this is not very far from another painting I did of a very antiquated bridge that the cattle actually get driven across, or have been in the past. It's a beautiful area. The light is what I'm particularly interested in. So the light was early morning, roughly in about a month's time, probably from now, very low sunlight, eclipsing the trees and just picking up on the tips of the burbling brook. So each of the little waves in the brook has a little bit of light on it. So I'm just going to move you in a bit more closely so we can have a good observe of it. So you might be able to see from this that the colours are, there's slight flashes of sort of turquoise and blues and pinks and oranges. So even though it looks like very natural colouring, it's actually really using some quite strong sort of unnatural paint just to highlight the way the light is behaving, and also to I've used very heavy tubed paint because I like to use the full range of watercolor tone, so right from the white of the page through to the solid tubed paint. And I use these Winsor & Newton tubes in the main, though I am going to use today Daniel Smith Moon Glow, which is quite a nice neutral, also a bit of Daniel Smith Indigo. But in the main, it's Winsor & Newton tubed paints that I use. So nice juicy watercolours. And I really love watercolours because they can have that range. They go right from that sort of incredibly dense tubed, almost impasto paint, through to the cascades that we can get in the outer areas of this painting in particular, where there's really the passage of the water trapped in the paint. And that's what makes watercolours feel alive. So I really feel they are a powerful medium. They create atmosphere. They're even helpful. That's how I feel. They're helpful because they actually move themselves if you use the benefit of water and dropping them into water. So what I'll do is I'm going to step by step take you through how I'd approach part of this painting. This is actually a painting that would take a lot longer than we have today. But if I can concentrate on what I would really be picking out, which is the focal point. So in each time when I think about my image that I want to paint, I definitely look at the focal point first. What is it about this painting that I'm really excited about? And that excitement carries me through the whole painting process. So the focal point for me was interesting for this one. There were two things that caught my eye. There was the sun actually coming through the trees, which I love the way it eclipses the tree boughs here. But there's also the wonderful water. And so these 2 points sort of competed for my attention. And in the end, the water won. And so what I did to ensure that your eye goes more to that than to this point is to really emphasize it with a heavy, dark edged tree next to it. And therefore, the contrast between the white of that light here and the dark of the tree trunk really brings out that focal point. And the darker I could make this section, the brighter that light would come out. So that was very important to me. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on one side and talk a little bit about the composition and make sure that you can see both. So I'm going to actually do a little bit of a drawing just to show you. I would normally draw very quickly the basics of a painting, I would pick out the crucial elements that I need to think about before painting, and that gives me confidence. I'm going to draw it for you now on paper, just so that you can see, because pencil never really shows up very well. Let me just drop this print down for now, and then we'll get them side by side. So, as you can imagine, it's this focal point down here that I would locate first. So I would go straight in and I would try and locate what is effectively a white pad in the area of the paper. Just make sure you can see that. So the white area of the paper is going to be there, and also I'm going to probably preserve this area of white in the paper, and actually in the distance there's another area, isn't there, sort of. That is the riverbank, and this is the farthest point that you can see up the river or the brook. But also, do you notice that there are there's a sort of pathway going down across the water here? So I'm very aware that actually the shape of this white is going to be elongated, the shape of this white area. And then we may have another section here, and maybe a little bit joining up to the farthest white. So in my head, I'm thinking white, white, white. That's what I'm really concerned about. So I'm really going to make sure that I remember that. And at the same time, I'm going to be thinking about horizons. So for me, there's one very large horizon, which is the gently raked far edge of the brook. So I'm going to try and locate that horizon, and it's going to go all the way up to effectively this tree, which is at the other side of the composition. And that's almost like a backstop, which will then be edged with foliage along the bottom right-hand corner of the painting. And that whole area of foliage will just neatly sort of bookend that side of the painting. This side of the painting needs to open out a bit. So I'm thinking about this area now where this fencing is. So I'll be careful to make sure that I'll locate this shape, which will balance out, and the other large dark shape is effectively here, and that's that tree. So can you see that there's sort of almost like a map going on here of tone? So we've got the whites, we've got the pathway of the whites coming towards the viewer. Then we've also got the dark areas. So this is dark here, dark here. So that's effectively what I'm thinking about. It doesn't look particularly beautiful because I haven't put in all the trees, but I'm locking that into my mind before I even start. And just a brief word about composition in terms of the very first decision I've made. I've decided to create a vertical landscape because that landscape is then quite powerful. So I feel that vertical landscapes really have drama. If you've got tall trees, what better way to show them than to allow the space for the boughs to really reach up into the sky. And at the same time, I'm going to have space for the brook to really reach down towards the viewer as well. It seems sort of simple, but you can really change the feel of the power of a painting by creating a landscape shape, which is much softer and more sort of heavily based. It's got a very much broader base. So by creating a vertical landscape, it actually gives it some more power. So what I've done now is got hold of my watercolour board. So my watercolour board is the surface I use. It's this surface. It's a De La Rowney Aquafine watercolour board. And it's this pad, comes in 10 sheets. Just getting the light a little bit closer. 10 sheets of A3 size. And the key thing about this pad is it says artboard here, because this aquafine paper comes without the backing of the board as well. So just watch out for that. And I can always email you more details if you need. So here's my A3 piece of board. It's smooth on one side, very sort of cool to the touch. That's the mount board on the back. And on this side, there's actual watercolor paper, just like any other watercolor paper you might use. So because it's glued to mount board, it's not got a weight because it's two materials attached to each other. Okay. So what I'm going to do is very, very briefly locate those points in my compositions I mentioned before. So I'm going to locate this white, the dark, just coming down here, the horizon line of the farthest side of the brook. You won't be able to see this because it's in pencil or not very well, but don't worry, it'll be highlighted very soon. It's just the same as my pen drawing that I just did. And all this sort of fanning shape will help guide the viewer up through the painting. So I might not be able to finish it all today, but at least I'll be able to get that focal point in and some of the shapes. Okay, so, and this is the second focal point up here. All right, so I'm happy now because I've got a little bit of a plan. It gives you more confidence as a watercolorist because, of course, watercolor really travels quite quickly down the page if you tilt your board. So I like to be ready for very mobile paint. Okay, so I've got my composition sorted. Now I'm just going to introduce you to the other materials that I've got. I'm going to use my 1-inch flat brush for most of this demonstration. It's a Pro Art flat brush. They call it a 1-stroke. That's because it actually does hold a lot of paint and releases it very quickly. So it's perfect for me. But it also creates lovely structure by the fact that it's got this flat end. And then later on, there's 2 other brushes. I will deal with them much later in this demo. But basically, there's a smaller flat brush for lifting out paint, and then a rigger, which once made wet, you'll see is extremely pointed, good for final detail, these little twigs, etc. But for the majority of the time, I'm going to be using my flat brush. So I've talked a little bit about light and composition, but now let me just highlight the different way that I paint. I think I've mentioned gravity painting in the details for this demo. It's the idea of using water to allow paint to run through it and create shapes that are soft and therefore atmospheric. So that's purely what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to capture the most atmospheric watercolor at the beginning, and then later I will sharpen up the detail. But initially, all I'm interested in really is that wonderful propensity for watercolors to show soft movement of paint as the water runs through them. So crucially, I'm going to wet the page every time I paint, at least for the first half of the demo, and I will use my large brush, it dipped into a very large jar of water, because I don't actually separate my cleaning water from my mixing water. I'll just have one large jar, and I will apply water to both the page and also the paints. So with me, I like to go in heavily with tubed paint from the start, because if you start with heavy tubed paint, you will have an idea of the darkest area and the lightest area right from the very beginning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly pop in some paints for you now into my palette. I've got 2 palettes. I've got a cold palette and a relatively warmer palette. And in terms of the colours that I hold within them, they're both these daisy palettes because I quite like circle as a more soft shape than those rectangular palettes you can get. It more resembles the way the paint behaves, I think. So what I'm going to do is just grab some colours. So I've popped Moonglow in already. This is ultramarine. I won't be able to show you all of them going in, but I'll talk about how I'm placing these tubed paints in my palette in a second. So let me just get, so this is raw sienna, another colour that I love and is very useful. Mixed with blues, it creates very soft, natural greens. But on top of that, I will be using a sap green. So again, these are Winsor & Newton paints. So sap green's going in. And burnt umber is a nice, well, it's very red brown, but it can be cooled with blues, etc. Check that I've got everything. Then quite often at the moment I'm using this purple lake, which is actually a Copeman colour. It's very soft mauve. And it goes beautifully with sap green. It's that purple green complementary colour combination. And then finally, a little bit of a highlight. This is alizarin crimson. So that's my colour scheme at the moment. I'll probably have yellow as well later because most of the yellows are raw sienna, but I will probably nip into the sort of lemon yellow area as well later. So if I start by showing you what I'm going to do to these paints, so hopefully you can see with the light on this. Each of these tubed blobs are placed towards the edge of the well in the palette. This is so that I can then get my brush and pull out some of the paint and create, with a wet brush, create a vat of soft sort of single cream paint. So I water down the paints, but not the whole of the lump of tubed paint. I will still have a lump of tube paint and the creamy consistency of its the same colour, but watered down. I'll just do that with a couple of colours that I know that I'm going to use straight away in the darkest area of my painting. So I'm going to go straight in. Usually when I'm teaching, I'm a little bit more careful. I'll go in with a sort of more of a mid-tone, but I like to paint dark to light. This is a constant discussion amongst watercolourists. Should you paint dark to light? Should you paint light to dark? But like I said, I prefer to be able to see the deepest area first. So I'm going to go in with the ultramarine and I'm going to go straight in next to my focal point, which is here. And I'm going to go in with solid paint. And I don't worry that it's dripping down because I'm going to actually break all of this area up into choppy water in a minute. So the ultramarine is quite a bright colour, isn't it? It's almost mauvish blue. And I'm just going to continue in this area with the ultramarine. And now I'm going in with some raw sienna on top. And raw sienna and ultramarine do create a bit of a green. A little bit of sap green is going into this wet area. So I've got an area of that's already been painted now quite quickly. Going to deepen that ultramarine with, that is Moonglow going in. So this has got to be my darkest area of the whole painting to show up this wonderful area of light. So I'm just going to use the corner of the brush. This is where the sculptural quality of the brush comes in, and I'm going to shape that so that I am happy that the shape of the tree is relatively natural. It's actually going to have sort of elbows in its shape. That's how trees tend to grow. They don't tend to, well, this type of tree tends to grow with changes in direction. Next to that is another tree. going in. So again, with this wonderful ultramarine, and you see how I actually tilted my board quite steeply for this demonstration, and it's really allowing the water and the paint to run down the tree as if it's a sort of drain pipe. I quite like that. So that's there. And then I'm just going to, with the corner of the brush, take that drip and bring it down the page and here as well. So I'm using the same colour as is in the tree to just create some of that reflection. And this is just the darker area, so I just need to put in a bit more of the moon glow. Okay. And then the third sort of hard dark area is over here, which is where I turn the brush to its real edge, and it's like a knife edge, the edge of the brush, and I really can draw almost like with using a rigger. And this is this tree here. So now I'm sort of fairly clear of where I'm going about things, and the other details can be put in later. So I'm going to build up this area around the sides now. I'm going to wet it because it's quite a big area. And I wet it first with the water from the jar, and then I'm going to drop in the mixture of colours you see in the painting. So wet work is always more atmospheric and it covers the area really well. And I didn't mention the turquoise that I can see here. I've got endless love affair with phthalo turquoise, and I've got some in my palette, so I'm just putting some in there and some over here. Okay. So while we're doing this, we're going to actually bring the foliage across the back of the picture and create that farthest point, but be careful. I'm watching that white area very closely, and that's where I want it to really glow as well. At the moment, I've just been painting sitting down. I'm about to stand up because I find it very much easier. So let me get up. And what this means is I've actually got perspective on the layout much better. So I'm above the painting now. And I'm just going to create the whole shape of this left-hand tree using wet and wet water. So wet and wet watercolours. And I'm going to, I noticed there's a little bit of this beautiful ultramarine in the tops, tree tops. And this area actually has some texture from salt. So I'm going to grab the salt. This is, I use just to break up the edges of the paint. And what I do is, I just want to make some foliage here. So I've put a little bit of salt in the palm of my hand. And I'll just sprinkle it at the top. And that's going to develop gradually on its own quite happily. And I'll do the same with other parts of the tops of the foliage in a sec. So let me I just want to perk up that blue a little bit there. And that's going to be quite dark. So I'm going in with a bit of heavier sap green here, just aware of those tones, making sure they're right. Okay. Again, that's not really dark enough, is it? Okay, now I'm going to extend these trees upwards so that I can continue with this sort of canopy looking area right across the painting. And this phthalo turquoise is so lightweight. It's very transparent paint and feels like air. Actually, it just looks like the breath of air. I'm going into that area of focal point, so just make absolutely sure that it's still got soft white edges around that area of the focal point. Coming across, and now this is the other focal point. I've got a circle here to remind me just to watch out for that area. And basically, I'm just knocking back the colour of the page. And you see how I'm holding my brush? I'm not actually holding it like a paintbrush, really. I'm rubbing the paint in now, creating a drier edge right at the top. And at this point, I also rather like that purple lake, which is, it actually sort of has a greying effect as well, which is, it's not bad with the sap green. It's quite a soft, not a dove grey, but something similar. So just building up a canopy right around the key focal point area. A little bit more of the purple lake going in. Okay, so while I wait for some of that to dry, I'm going to, I'll be able to go over it then once it's dried and put in some of these tree trunks. I'm just going to have a quick look at the layout of that area. Just bring it down quite closely to this focal point and make absolutely sure that it's going to show up. So if you don't have some colour there, it's just not going to show up. Okay, so I'm making it effectively like a tree tunnel. Now I should say a bit more about this wonderful watercolour board. It's going to allow me to lift off details later and put, obviously you can put hard detail back on, but I'm going to be able to lift out details. So I'm a little bit relaxed about the look of everything at the moment. It's almost semi-abstract. And I want this top area just to dissipate into nothing. But again, just watching out for that, the focal points. So it's a mixture of purple lake and sap green and phthalo turquoise at the top. None of these are particularly natural. I guess the sap green is, but it's what you want, isn't it, really, what the colours you use. You can use what you like, whatever works for you and what you see. So what I'm doing now is just getting another bit of salt. Because I'm working so vertically, I'm having to throw this salt at the top of the painting because it won't stick otherwise. So if you, I would actually ideally tilt my page a little bit less sharply than this, but I will always tilt the page because of that process that I mentioned right at the beginning, which is the passage of paint through water, which is so beguiling. Okay. So I've got the rough area mapped out. I'm just going to improve the accuracy of that a little bit, just hone in a bit closer. So we want to make sure that this bank is a little bit more distinct now. It's the raw sienna that I'm using to create the banks, really, as in the original picture. And then that wonderful heavy blue will come in as part of the suggestion of tree trunks, etc. And I'll use some of the rigger to put in some of the details. So just let this dry for a bit longer, and then I'll bring it up the trees trunks into the top areas, but at the moment that tree trunk had to go in right at the beginning because I really wanted to know where it was going to be. While I'm waiting, I'm just going to beef up that dark area again. And the drips that actually run through these trunks do look like bark. They're absolutely lovely. And it's all quite damp now, so I have to be a bit careful about where I'm putting these things, but I quite like the way everything drips first. Down the bottom here, we've got some very icy foliage, and here, I actually used masking fluid, but these days I'm using less and less masking fluid. I'm finding it a bit of a hindrance, so I'm not going to use any today, and I'll see how I manage to develop that area without masking fluid by lifting off. Okay, so let's tidy up some of these drips so you can see a bit better. This is another wonderful advantage of this artboard. You can remove drips enough so that they really won't be noticeable once you've done the painting all around them. So that's why I don't worry about them, because worrying about all the extra sort of areas around the outside, that's not relevant. You've just got to keep focusing on the important bit, and the drips can do what they like for now. Okay, I'm just standing back a bit, so important. Waiting for this to dry. I would not get a hairdryer on it because I just find that hairdryers are too harsh. So while I'm waiting for it to dry, I'm going to drag some of these shapes across the water. Now, all I'm doing is using the end of my brush to create ripples, and they've got to be different. I wouldn't repeat the shapes. I'm trying to think in sort of lozenges or wedges going across. So I'm looking at this water now, and this water will eventually have the shapes of the shadows of the tree trunks popped across them. But for now, I'm just putting in the basic overall shape of the water. And remembering this is going to be the bright area, I'm going to only pull in water shapes up to the edge of it. How are we doing for time? Good. Working quite quickly. So again, just going to try and leave that area as bright as possible, but that means also getting in quite heavily with the paint on its edges, so it really shines as bright. Okay, let's just drag that water across, and gradually, as we move away from the focal point, these areas of water are going to join up, because I want all the attention to go here. And gradually, I think I'm going to make it darker with a bit of ultramarine and a bit of moon glow. So this is highlighted even more. Okay. Just bring out this edge now. I'm using a bit of sap green because even though this is the ripples on the water, I'm going to have a sort of a relationship between this bit of water and the area of ground above. Now, at the moment, it's all quite sharp, and eventually I will probably put in a unifying wash across the top. As I'm burbling on here, do feel free to unmute if you've got any questions, because I'm working quite quickly, but this is the real wet stage. If you can see now how the salt has broken up the area of foliage in the sap green and in the phthalo turquoise, and created a sort of speckled look. And that's what I want for my foliage. It's nice and not random, irregular is the word that I wanted to use. Make sure you can see okay. Kitchen roll is very much part of my practice. I will just use it to mop up mainly at the base of my painting, because down here there's a lot of pooling paint developing. But I don't like to remove too much at this stage, because the absolute massive rule with watercolors is they dry lighter. So if you remove paint too quickly and you know, willingly, you end up with not enough paint left on your page, and you have none of that wonderful strength that watercolors can also bring. Now, with a bit of trepidation, I'm going into a semi-wet area here with another tree trunk, and the tree trunk is going to be broken up by the actual foliage, so I'm not going to be able to see it all the way up. And then this area, my tree trunks are blue this time rather than green in the original painting, which is quite interesting. I'm getting a bit more abstract as I grow older. I will add a bit of the sap green in. So remember, these trunks become almost like downpipes for paint. In a minute, I'm going to look at the shapes that I'm making and make absolutely sure they're nice and irregular, and I'll review all of those shapes. But at the moment, I'm just trying to get them in the right place. The aim is not to have exactly the same painting, but to have the feel of this place. So I'm just planting some of these shapes in. This area really is quite dark. I'm going to go in a bit heavier. So my densest paints are the granular paints that are sap green, ultramarine's fairly granular. We've got raw sienna, but it's a bit pale, so it doesn't feel as dense. So when I'm looking for dark areas, I'm using the wonderful granular paints. Okay. So at the moment, I'm just putting paint on all the time. It's very much the first stage for me, and I'll show you in a tick how wonderful this board is at allowing you to lift off and massage the paint so that it goes where you want it to. So I'm putting it on for now, and then I can lift off later. I'm squinting my eyes a bit all the time to try and see the lights and the darks. Once this area is dry, I'm going to put a lovely layer of aqua, sort of phthalo turquoise over to join up the top highlights and make them get them knocked back a bit so they don't compete with this focal point. Okay. So I'm going to just build up this area of bank. Feels a bit like I'm jumping around a bit today. Just thinking in terms of tone all the time. So let's get this bank extending outwards. Okie dokie. I think I've done quite a bit of the heavier 1-inch brush painting. I'm going to shift in a sec and just get a little bit of finer detail in. Just extending the water again. Just trying to figure out how I'm going to do this lower edge, because I've got to lift off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just deepen and darken this area with a combination of ultramarine, and I'm going to use some moon glow, and this is just going to act as a nice edge to the base of the picture. Someone's got a nice clock there. Maggie, did you have a question at all? I can mute you.
About the salt, is
Yes.
it rock salt?
That
Yes.
one was actually just common or garden table salt. It's because the fine particles will stick and adhere to my very vertical painting. The trouble is rock salt has got a weight to it. These crystals will fall off. So I've just used normal table salt today. And it's a much finer, it doesn't shout. The shapes are very delicate and suit the very tops of the trees. So that's why I've used them. Okay. So just finally putting a little bit more paint on here so I can lift it off in a minute. I don't want lots and lots of lights everywhere. I want this to be bright, but not necessarily the rest. So I'm going to just fill in this area. Now it's starting to funnel a bit better. I'll put in some interesting extra colours soon, but for now, trying to make sure you can see it straight. I don't want to put in any reds yet because they are going to make it very even busier than it is right now. Okay, so I think that I'm almost there with the layout. I'm just going to make sure that there's, just move this clip, fill in this area. I quite like the idea of making a painting look a bit like the human eye looks, which is i.e. a lot of sharp focus in the center, and then this is just supporting the main event, which will be this strong area in the center. So this is all just very soft.